Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is August 22nd, 2016, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things tonight. Now, every week I try to get into the news and then try to get into the roundup of some other issues and tend to run out of time because an hour is generally not enough time to go through some of these issues in detail. But tonight I'm going to try my best to get all of this information in one show and to talk about our strategic plan for action. Now, those of you who are regular listeners will know that last week we had a rebroadcast going instead of the new show, and I apologize for that. There were some technical difficulties. The show was pre-recorded, and apparently there was something wrong with the recorded file, and we did not know about that until neither I nor the station knew that there was a significant damage to the file until it went to be broadcast, and then it was essentially gone. So we don't really know what caused that, but we're back, and we're going to try to catch up with all of that stuff here tonight. Now, again, for the new listeners, Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, UCY.TV. If you want to follow my personal work, and it's activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, eraofwisdom.org. And if you want to follow my work specifically, I highly encourage you to go to BrandonTurbeville.com, and that's going to be the hub for a lot of action and information coming here in the future. So please go check that out. The site, as well as the show, has been growing by leaps and bounds here over the last 6 months to a year. It's been growing slowly before then, but we're growing even more now, as well as the influence, the sphere of influence that we have. Now, on social media last week, or maybe a week and a half ago, I put out a call for individuals who were interested in making a positive change in the world, who were actually interested in taking action as opposed to simply being a member of the audience or being a spectator in this whole situation and watching things go down and perhaps even journaling things as they go down. Well, that's what a journalist is, right? They journal things, they chronicle things. If there's a war, they write about what's happening so that you have a record of it and that you're aware of it, or at least that's what they're supposed to do. The mainstream journalists are nothing but paid propagandists. But we're not interested necessarily in journalism. We're interested in activism. We're interested in making history, not reporting on it. So I put out a call last week on social media asking anyone who was interested to contact me, and that we have this plan of action, right? And what I got were several comments publicly of support, and I got tons of messages privately offering support. And what I said in the message was that if you're interested in getting active, then contact me, and I'm not going to ask you to do something you don't want to do. I'm not going to ask you to do something that that you're not able to do. I'm not going to ask you to do anything illegal or put yourself in a really awkward, bad position. I think what we've got going on here can be, seized upon by individuals, much of which can be done from their computer, their phone, and I'm not going to ask you to go out there and get yourself arrested. So I got a lot of support, a lot of messages of support, and as a result of that, today, August 22nd, we have, and I should mention the show's being pre-recorded August 21st, but we have a number of individuals who are working toward these ends, right? We have a network now that is pushing the platform of the 43 points that I put out, A Real New Deal for America, 43 points. So you can find that on the website, BrandonTurbeville.com. We have a network that is now pushing for the implementation of these 43 points. And I want to give you an idea of how we're going to approach the activist angle here in regards to the 43 points. We need somebody who is willing to establish connections with these groups and act as a uniting factor between them. The groups I'm referring to, whether they're anti-war organizations, pro-gun organizations, pro-weed organizations, doesn't matter. We are trying to bring these organizations together. We are trying to bring activists together. We're trying to bring individuals together and promote a united front. We want to work from your city, your county, your state, and then your country out. Now, I should mention, too, we have a network of people working not only here in the United States, but also in England. So we have activists working in a number of, in at least 2 countries, and in Canada as well. So we've got 3 countries at least, and we're going to expand our reach further, I suspect, in the coming days. Now, if you're interested in this and you're listening to the show, then please send me an email, anticodex@yahoo.com, ANTICODEX@yahoo.com, ANTICODEX@yahoo.com. You can find that website, you can find that email address on the website, BrandonTurbeville.com, Contacts tab. So basically, to give you an example, we have a growing number of groups that are dedicated to issues, specific issues, and are working to make the changes that are necessary to bring about a better world here. And one issue, for example, is the marijuana issue. We've got NORML, for instance, is probably the biggest group out there, and then we've got Texas for Legalization, or Arkansas Pro-Weed Party. I just made the last 2 up. But these groups are all working largely for the same ends, but to my knowledge don't cooperate as much as they should. And that's why we need people to go in and help them cooperate with each other. And I can give you more detail upon that if you're interested. And again, I am fully aware of the fact that everybody has a life and that people need time to spend with their families, or to simply relax, or that they're busy and overworked as it is. And I understand that sometimes you just need time to go out and get drunk and enjoy yourself. So this is not something that we are trying to dole out responsibilities that are going to be too great for anyone. We're well aware of the way that society is structured and the needs that people have. So we're trying to make an effective change without taking anybody's life away from them in that sense. So let me know if you're interested in doing this, and I can give you the specifics and the steps needed to be taken. And you will be joining a network of people. And you're not joining a group also. That's another thing I should say. I'm not going to ever ask you to join a group. This is not a group. We don't have a group name here. We are simply just a collection of individuals who are coming together for a common cause. And we are now spreading our influence out over the Atlantic Ocean, across national borders, in a number of different states in the United States. In fact, I just got a notification today of another individual working to implement these 43 points in California as well. So West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, South, North, New England, whatever. We've got people in each one of those locations, each one of those general locations, and we're going to get many more. So please, again, send me an email, anticodex@yahoo.com, and I will send you the details if you're interested in making history instead of simply reporting on it. Now, let's look at the news. What's in the news today is the little Omran, the Aleppo boy. Right? We have this footage of the mainstream Western press parading yet another injured child in front of a population of people who are normally uncompassionate, and they are attempting to drum up compassion so they can drum up support for some type of NATO military action against the Syrian government. The picture of the little boy, He seems to be injured, some type of bombing incident. He's sitting alone in an orange chair in the back of an ambulance. He's got blood stains on his face. He's covered in dust from cracked concrete. And you can also see the video of this. And the footage lasts for about 2 minutes. Shows him being carried to a well-equipped ambulance. It's got, notably, there's some Arabic writing in the ambulance, but there's also English writing on some of the equipment. And the boy's story is, of course, accompanied by heart-wrenching stories from activists in East Aleppo alleging the crimes of the Syrian government and the horrific situation there. I'm not going to read any mainstream reports. Basically, it's they're saying it's a result of an airstrike, and remember, this is a rebel-held area. Now, it's rather clear, if you watch this footage, that the child is being used as a stage prop. After he's passed to the medical attendants, and I put medical attendants in quotes there, he's placed in an orange chair facing the camera and immediately left alone. He's not treated. Nobody else is lifted into the ambulance. Nobody is even in the vehicle with him. Instead, he's left to face the activists outside the vehicle and their cameras. And it seems like much too long a time to be anything other than a photo op for the activists who are videotaping him. Now, some more discerning alternative media outlets are questioning the credibility of the footage. Some of them are even suggesting that the entire affair was simply staged by, again, activists. And of course, I keep saying it that way because activists means terrorists and terrorist supporters, like the White Helmets, for instance. This is the activists say school of journalism. Okay, so basically, a lot of media outlets are saying this is just simply staged by propaganda purposes. But you really don't need to go so far in order to destroy the narrative that's being pushed by the Western outlets here. It is, of course, quite possible that the footage was simply created from beginning to end by propagandists, but there's also no shortage of footage of injured and dying children in Syria. So the possibility that it's completely real and merely seized upon by propagandists is incredibly real as well. So it's even possible that the child was injured as a result of errant bombs dropped by Syrian or Russian planes. We're not going to deny that people are killed by bombs dropped by the Syrian government or the Russian government. This is unfortunately a reality of war. There is and has never been any intentional targeting of civilians by the Syrian government or the Russians, unlike the United States bombs, which have, ever since World War II, targeted civilians. But we have an interesting point here is when children are killed or injured by American bombs or by the bearded freaks that are receiving a paycheck from the U.S. government, those kids are simply labeled collateral damage or unfortunate realities of war. But even if the bombing targets were intentionally civilian areas, the results are excused. When the children are unintentionally injured by a Syrian or Russian plane with the bombs go off course or some other manner, despite all the appropriate measures taken to avoid these types of incidents, the Western press comes out in full force and refers to the results of the bombing as crimes against humanity, intentional targeting of civilians, and Assad killing his own people, and that type of thing. We also need to note that all of that taken in context, any of that may be the source of little Omran's injuries. It's just as likely that his injuries came as a result of the men that are handling him in the footage. After all, these America's rebels have long killed children in the most grotesque manners. They beheaded a young boy on camera just a few weeks ago. Didn't see Kate Bolduan crying her eyes out on TV over that. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen Kate Bolduan cry her eyes out except for this issue on cue, like a good trained monkey. The injuries. Now, we can even put the nature of the injuries aside for just a second and look at the photo and the footage as clearly a propaganda stunt. At best, it was seized upon by propagandists in the West and the foot soldiers in rebel-held areas of Syria, meaning the terrorist support operations like the White Helmets and terrorist organizations themselves. You only need to look at the photographer and this push by mainstream outlets to see that this incident is being used for war-porn propaganda. It's designed to create sympathy and moral outrage in an audience that has been devoid of both until they're told to have one or the other by their media outlets, and then they're willing to give money and cry their eyes out when they're told to. They're also willing to be cold and callous when they're not. Now, let's look at the photojournalist or the journalist or the photographer. Mahmoud Raslan, right? He's an activist, he's a journalist, he's a terrorist. Raslan describes himself as a Syrian media activist, which is a red flag to anybody like me who's been studying the Syrian crisis in the world of Western media. Please be aware that anyone defining themselves as an activist in Syria should immediately be translated to mean terrorist. Calling terrorists activists has been an important mode of operation by the Western media since day one in Syria, since activists can be quoted, and terrorists are not seen as credible enough in the minds of the general public right now anyway. So in other words, activist is simply a moniker that's assumed by terrorists whenever propaganda outfits need on-the-ground confirmation of what they were already peddling. Now, Raslan, the Syrian media activist, he certainly fits the bill. He's been hailed as a true journalist or a selfless activist by Western media. But if you look at his social media pages, he has a history of supporting terrorism. We have public statements made by Raslan praising terrorists and suicide bombers. You go take a look at his Facebook page, and it's in Arabic, but this is what it says. With the suicide fighters from the land of battles and butchery, from Aleppo of the martyrs, we bring you tidings of impending joy with God's permission. We got another post that says, thousands of suicide fighters and tens of booby traps are being prepared for the great battle in Aleppo, the first battle where I see men weeping because they can't participate on account of the number of attackers. We've even got footage of him standing next to captured Syrian tanks, footage of him marching with terrorists, flying the French Mandate flag, the white, black, and green flag, pictures of him taking selfies with terrorists, celebrating terrorist victories. We've got his Twitter page. His Twitter page alone has a cover photo that says, Stop Russia. And you got to ask, why would anybody want to stop Russia from bombing terrorists unless they were the terrorists or unless they supported the terrorists? This is a question more and more Americans should be asking themselves in relation to their own government. But we've also got more media videos on Raslan's social media page showing celebrations with other terrorists. He's praising suicide bombers on camera. And as we have from Miri Wood, she's got an article, Oscar nominations for War Porn with Child has new nomination. She wrote that with Fra Dogger. It says that one woman with a Twitter account can immediately expose this heinous relationship, while paid mainstream media reporters cheer this scum. It is further indictment of the criminal intentions of Western media against the Syrian Arab Republic. End quote. Indeed, if a woman with a Twitter account, without the resources that mainstream journalists have, can figure this out and can uncover it within hours, or at least a day, of the pictures being peddled across the mainstream media, then you know damn well CNN could figure it out as well. Alternative media does not have the same resources, but this was discovered nonetheless. We have the... Well, actually, we'll move on to... I have an article that I would encourage you to go look at, by the way. It's called A Footage of Boy in Aleppo is Opportunistic Vile Propaganda from Western Media. And there's quotes from Miri Wood, Afra Dogger, and Muhawesh from Mint Press News, and they have commentary on this as well. But we have this award-winning performance of CNN news anchor Kate Bolduan crying, hyperventilating, indignantly insinuating that somebody should do something to stop the airstrikes against terrorists that have caught the attention of many people who couldn't find Syria on a map either before her report or after. Still couldn't find it on a map. We haven't seen Bolduan crying for any other Syrian children over the course of the last 5 years. She didn't cry over that boy that was beheaded by America's moderate rebels a few weeks ago. She didn't cry at any other child's death at the hands of these so-called rebels. There's no shortage of dead children in Syria. There's certainly no shortage of them killed in the most horrific and sadistic ways by the activists and rebels that her employer has been pimping to the American people since day one. So why is she crying for this child? She has this carefully scripted performance, and we should congratulate her on her excellent follow-through, her excellent performance here. That should earn her a serious acting career job one day, but we would ask that she leave journalism to adults and to other people who are more responsible. Now, it's unfortunate. Little Umran is the rehash of Baby Aylan. Do you remember Baby Aylan? Because most Americans don't. They wept and wailed for days. As a result of Baby Aylan, they were more and more willing to allow the West to increase its intervention in Syria and allow hordes of non-Syrian immigrants into their countries. But most Americans, if you ask, do you remember Baby Aylan, wouldn't even warrant a head scratch. They wouldn't even recognize the name because we have an attention span in the West of about -5 seconds. It's virtually impossible now to ask any American to recount the name of Baby Aylan, and it's almost impossible to ask him about the little girl that was killed by Obama's rebels in Latakia. She was car bombed by these moderates and democracy-loving Sharia fanatics about the same time as Baby Aylan washed ashore. And why does no American know that name? Because not one mainstream media outlet reported her death. Instead, it was Baby Aylan who drowned to death. And by the way, those photos were staged. Photo ops, the photographers actually dragged his body over to the location where they wanted to take the picture, and they took the picture for dramatic effect. So it's obvious that some children are more equal than others, and children killed by America's terrorists aren't even worthy of a mention in the mainstream press. So forgive me if I'm just unconvinced and unmoved by CNN's crying news anchors or the American people's temporary, fickle, and hypocritical moral outrage. So we have now exposed the latest propaganda ploy. Unfortunately, little Umran is a propaganda ploy that is going to be used to justify a greater involvement in Syria on the part of the West. And again, we're for solutions. We call on the United States, NATO, the GCC, and the Israelis to stop funding terrorism, stop supporting terrorism, and we can be done with it. If you want to end terrorism, stop supporting it. If you want to look at the capitals of terrorism, then you got to look at Washington, D.C., Tel Aviv, London, Berlin. You got to look at these, Paris. You got to look at these different Western capitals and look at that as the head of terrorism. You want to stop it, stop funding it. Work with the Syrian government in order to stop funding terrorism. But of course, that is not the track that they're going to take. And in fact, we've gotten some serious other issues, some more dangerous provocations taking place in Syria now, where we have the warplane confrontation or borderline warplane confrontation over Syria between the U.S. and the Syrian government. Now, we saw we got a report from the Telegraph, August 20th, Syrian regime jets risked an aerial confrontation with U.S. warplanes on Saturday after flying over a battleground city in northern Syria, despite warnings that bombing there could lead to American forces opening fire. In other words, the United States is demanding that Syria not fly its own planes over its own territory to bomb terrorists that have invaded its country. It's threatening military action against Syrian government planes. And what is this? This is essentially a declaration that if the Syrian government attacks terrorists, the United States will come in and start a direct war against the Syrian government. We had American commandos who were conducting special operations with Kurdish forces in Syria called in warplanes, American warplanes, to chase off Syrian Su-24 warplanes. And that was admitted by the Pentagon on Friday. We have a quote from Foreign Policy. It says, Syrian jets nearly bomb U.S. commandos in Syria. That's the stupid level of propaganda that is coming from the Western media. Of course, that's the Council on Foreign Relations, so what do you expect? But it's the first time the U.S. has scrambled aircraft in response to Syrian efforts to stop Kurdish advances. Now, the Kurdish YPG, and we've discussed the Kurdish YPG, these are the people that are now working with the United States. The extreme communists, they're cult-like feminist, cultural Marxist theology, and we call it theology because it's obviously a religion. It's the wide-eyed religious aspect. These do not represent the majority of the Kurdish people. They represent a minority of armed fanatics. We reported a while back about the U.S. commandos who were working with them, and that were actually photographed working with them. So it actually upset Turkey. This is something that precipitated perhaps the Turkish coup and the move toward Russia. So we have this issue now where the United States is threatening Syria. It says go back to the Telegraph. It says the U.S. scrambled its own jets on Thursday after the Assad regime aircraft dropped bombs on Kurdish forces in the city of Hasaka, dangerously close to U.S. commandos operating on the ground. Well, I'm sorry, U.S. You put them there. You made them targets. You can just shut up about it. You were not invited in by the Syrian government. The U.S. was not invited in. The Russians were. The Iranians were. Hezbollah was invited in. The United States was not. The United States is an invading force. But guess what? You don't hear the United Nations crying about this, do you? You don't hear the United Nations having a Security Council meeting about the United States aggression in Syria. Why? Because the United Nations is a part of this agenda against the Syrian people. The United Nations is not an organization that is standing in terms of this mediating type of organization that seeks peace and is just hampered by lack of authority and lack of participation. The United Nations is simply an exercise in officialdom for imperialism and world hegemony of the Anglo-European, Anglo-American empire. So, and of course, not just that. Now we can include other nationalities and that. This is a worldwide thing. So it says the incident ended without shots being fired, but the Pentagon warned that similar bombing raids could lead to U.S. jets shooting down the Syrians. A spokesman said the Syrian regime would be well advised not to interfere with coalition forces or its partners. Well, we say to the spokesman, you would be well advised to get the hell out of Syria. What can we say here without being too dramatic? The United States, if it wants to open fire on Syrian warplanes, I mean, the United States has essentially made itself a target the Syrians could bomb U.S. commandos directly. The Syrians could shoot American warplanes out of the sky and would be 100% justified in doing so. No crying over the collateral damage, because it was the United States who put those people in harm's way. The Syrians would have the moral high ground in order to defend their country. And just because Americans have an obsession with war, an obsession with worshiping the military, I'm sorry, that's going to be used for propaganda purposes if an American soldier is killed by the Syrian government, but we aren't going to fall for it. If an American soldier is killed by the Syrian government, then you should march right up to the doors of the White House and yank Obama out of it, or Hillary Clinton, the automaton cackling witch, should be held responsible, because this is her war as much as it is Obama's, and this is Horseface Kerry's war as much as it is Obama's, who also bears as much responsibility for this war as George W. Bush, who helped initiate some of the funding and propagandizing and organization for the Syrian war years before Obama even took office. So we're going back to 2005, 2006, possibly even before then, that the groundwork was being laid for this type of incident and type of crisis. So what else can be said? The U.S. has put itself in a position, it is trying to goad the Syrian government into either backing off and allowing the U.S. to support its cultural Marxist fanatics and its bearded monkey terrorists into taking over the country, and the Syrian government, simply afraid of a confrontation with the United States, backs off and eventually dies the death of 1,000 cuts. Or it's trying to goad them into bombing an American commando or shooting down an American jet so the United States can cry and whine and plaster pictures up of the American commando, who of course will be a really good guy who loved his country, to get Americans watching television day after day to be obsessed and angry and ready to go off and launch another war and get more American soldiers killed, countless of innocent civilians. That won't matter, though, because in the world of day-to-day propaganda, day-to-day entertainment-obsessed cultures, this will make Americans feel tough. As their economy goes down the tubes, you can be unemployed, but at least you're a badass because an 18-year-old went across the ocean to kill somebody that didn't do anything to you. So, congratulations, America. Now, this is the situation in Syria. It's going to heat up, we imagine, and we have to look at what the Russian response might be, because the Russians have made it clear that the Syrian government can indeed bomb terrorists, but this issue of the Kurds seems to be outside of the public agreement. So this is going to be something that ushers in a new, hopefully diplomatic flurry, and we hope that the Syrian government is able to continue its fight against terrorism. The encirclement of Aleppo, there is the intense fighting around this tiny corridor of territory that leads into Aleppo that the terrorists launched a counterattack for and managed to break through the encirclement, but only by a small amount. And now there's virtually a stalemate at this area of the corridor, and it's heavy fighting, but no one can get really in or out. So it's open, but supplies can't really get through because of the artillery control held by the Syrian military over this area. But again, when it comes down to it, this issue of the planes, the U.S. threatening the Syrian government in regards to flying bombing missions against the Kurdish fanatics, this is going to be something that is very, very important to look at in the coming days, because this is something that could also potentially produce a conflict with Russia. it's going to depend. The Russians, and mainly Putin, have simply played circles around the Americans ever since Putin's re-election to the presidency, and ever since Obama's. But we certainly hope that this is going to work out positively. The potential is there for something cataclysmic. In other words, again, a direct military confrontation with Russia that escalates. There's also the potential for intrigue in terms of diplomatic debate. A couple of incidents occur, a flurry of diplomacy, and then a new type of agreement. And we certainly hope that that agreement is beneficial to the Syrian government and not to NATO imperialism, not toward terrorism, not toward cultural Marxist fanaticism. So that's what we hope to see. But we're going to be following that closely in the next few weeks. Now, I guess since we're talking about international affairs, we should mention the response of the Saudi Arabians. They finally responded to the fact that the Houthis have invaded Saudi Arabia and that they've penetrated about 10 kilometers into the country. The Saudi Arabians have responded. They're attempting to break the Houthi force control over the positions in the Jizan region, and the Saudi air raids were launched in this region. And what precipitated that were 3 Houthi ballistic missiles that just pounded their positions in Jizan. But the air raids, interestingly enough, took place in the village of Al-Khamer. Saudi bombings were indiscriminate. Civilians were largely the target of the attacks. These were helicopter-based attacks. And a number of these civilians were killed in the process. Didn't really do anything to the Houthi positions inside the country. It did kill a bunch of civilians. And I don't know what else we could say other than the kingdom of Saudi Arabia is now showing its military weakness. It's likely to embolden dissidents inside the country, not just outside, not just the Houthis, but it's likely to embolden dissidents inside Saudi Arabia. They've been kept down in the past by the threat of the Saudi security forces. But after this abysmal failure of Saudi Arabia, not just to invade another country and destroy the people there, but to the ability to defend their own territory, and then the response to target their own citizens indiscriminately, we might see dissatisfaction with the feudal monarchy reach new heights at some point. So that might spell ruin to the Western-supported kingdom. Now, let's look also. We have another bit of propaganda regarding Syria. I forgot to mention this. I should have mentioned this earlier. Before Little Omran, we had the open letter the open letter of Aleppo doctors that was written to Obama to do something. Once again, the cry is to do something. We have the alleged letter written by alleged doctors alleging that the Syrian military is encircling Aleppo in order to allegedly kill civilians. Now, nothing about this letter makes sense. The only truth in this propaganda narrative of the West is that the Syrian military is encircling Aleppo. That's a good thing. We've demonstrated over and over again that Assad's forces are not targeting innocent civilians. We're not going to go through that tonight. But the doctors in question, none of them have been confirmed as actually being doctors, or even that the letter was written by whoever these individuals might turn out to be. In other words, the whole story of the letter is just basically an allegation, right? Since the letter has been reported by The Guardian, a host of other Western mainstream media outlets, as fact, and it conveniently tugs at the heartstrings. Again, the use of children in order to promote war against children. This is something that has made its rounds across the Western mainstream press. And this letter really is just semi-carefully crafted act of pro-war propaganda, which is calling on the United States and the West to do something. And it includes accusations against the Russians, against the Syrians, as well as claims of alleged targeting of hospitals by the Russians and the Syrians. They even have incubator babies in this. I'm not making this up. You can read the letter in my article. The doctors are calling for war, and there's no question about this. They want the U.S. to intervene directly and liberate Syria, spread democracy that's left every other liberated country the burning heaps of rubble and savagery that they are today. They're calling for the forces of Assad to be defeated so that the rebels, aka Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, right? Not Al-Nusra. They changed the name, makes all the difference. Arar al-Sham, ISIS, all these guys. So they can take over the city and impose their prehistoric Sharia rule over civilized people and have all the requisite amount of rape and murder and torture and pedophilia to go along with the rebel liberation. So nice work, doctors. Nice work, U.S. But I guess we should sarcastically congratulate the State Department instead. After all, there's very little evidence that these doctors actually exist. The Guardian itself was stated that it's not, this is a direct quote, it has not been possible to verify the names of all the doctors listed in the letter, end quote. It's going to be difficult to prove the names of the letter writers because most of these doctors are allegedly pediatricians. And the Telegraph and most of the other mainstream media outlets told us on April 28th that the last pediatrician in Aleppo was killed by Assad's forces, of course, because rebel bullets can't harm doctors even if they wanted to. Only Assad's forces can harm doctors, even by accident. So they're going to be difficult to track down if they're all dead. They told us all the pediatricians were dead on April 28th. Now we've got these guys coming out of the woodwork writing letters. This doesn't make sense. Also, what's interesting about the doctors who signed the letter, look at their names. These names, almost all of them, are names of well-known terrorists. Is that a coincidence? That's a very odd coincidence. And here's something funny about it. One name is not even the name of a person. It's a parlor in Aleppo. So now parlors have medical degrees and are writing letters to the U.S. government demanding war on their country. This is just beyond credibility here. At some point, we think the State Department should hire new writers because this is getting to be the bottom of the barrel. It's simply an epic fail of the U.S. propaganda machine this time, right? The State Department must be running out of money, or Americans are just so dumbed down that these type of cheap narratives like this one actually work, or the war machine is simply throwing everything it can against the wall, see what sticks. The letter was more of a fail, of course, than Little Umran. Anytime you can get actual footage paraded across TV, because most Americans don't really read news, they watch news in a semi-cognizant, semi-awake state, and they don't really read it. And you can give them to them in a sound bite. You can fake crying, and this has more of an effect. And then they can forget the fact that they were helping or supporting killing children 30 seconds ago. They can support protecting the children by killing other children. Cognitive dissonance has never been a problem, or hasn't in recent years with the Western audiences. And they'll never know the difference. That's what's so interesting about it. They can launch a full-scale war, and in 2 years they won't even remember, even as the war continues to march forward. I still see people talk about the end of the Iraq War, that Obama finally ended the Iraq War. This is infantile levels of stupidity, but this is unfortunately where we are at. Now, the letter to Aleppo, this probably tugged at maybe a few heartstrings of leftists who always support the humanitarian bombing, humanitarian war, responsibility to protect doctrine, which of course always results in imperialism, but not to the leftist brain. You don't have to go very far to get a right-winger to support a war, because they support the next war even if they don't know what it is yet. They'll support invading Canada if given the opportunity. But the leftists, they need a little cover, like protecting the children, the ones outside the womb, of course. But they have to rush in and launch a massive war, which will, of course, kill more children than any other option in the situation. But they can feel good about themselves, because war only exists when Republicans do it. Hillary Clinton, the, again, cackling witch, the robotic psychopath, is going to be the next leader of the so-called free world that has the highest incarceration rate in the world, in liberating other countries and turning them into something beyond the Stone Age, prehistoric levels of savagery and barbarism in these countries. So this is a responsibility to protect humanitarian bombing doctrines that we've had for the last 8 years. It's war without the anti-war movement, basically. Now, we have some positive news. This is positive, but it's also, we have to be realistic, right? This is positive on one level. This is according to the South China Morning Post, the Chinese military is going to begin providing assistance and aid to the Syrian government, and that agreement was made on August 14th. That was made after a visit by the special envoy Xi Jiayan, the former Chinese ambassador to Iran, in March. The Chinese military delegation to Syria, which was headed by Chinese Rear Admiral Guan Yofei, the Director of International Cooperation at the Central Military Commission, met with the Syrian Vice Prime Minister Fahed Jassim al-Frej and the Syrian Minister of Defense. And the Chinese military is offering humanitarian aid to Syria, as well as enhancing personnel training. Right? Al-Frej thanked the Chinese government as well as the Chinese military, saying that the Chinese People's Liberation Army is willing to continue cooperation with the Syrian military. We also have reports saying that Guan also met with Lieutenant General Sergei Kharkov, who is the chief of the Russian Center for Reconciliation of Opposing Sides in Syria. The Chinese, and we have to look at this just a bit, because this is definitely, in terms of the Syrian situation specifically, a positive development. Any increase in aid, increase in public support for Syria is positive. But we cannot be unrealistic and believe that just because the Chinese are doing something in opposition to the United States, the Chinese are the good guys. The Chinese are imperialists. This is, maybe not to the scale of the United States, but that is because of the lack of ability, not because of lack of will. The Chinese are indeed imperialists. This is a self-interest here. Now, one of the interests that the Chinese have in Syria is the idea of attriting terrorists who are fighting in Syria because of its own concerns about the Uyghur element that is fighting in its own territory. The Uyghur separatists have been fighting for independence from the oppressive Chinese government, for sure, but the Uyghur separatists are themselves fanatical in nature. They're also arms of Turkey's Grey Wolves, which is a NATO operation. It's Operation Gladio in 2016. So the Chinese cooperation in Syria, we welcome that, but we also welcome that with both eyes open, and to realize that the Chinese have other aims in Syria, and it's not just the moral high ground for sure. So, I mentioned being the freest country in the world. let's talk about something domestic for a minute. Since we're free, we have so much freedom that we have to export it. We now have an emergency in regards to Kratom. This is the, we have the CDC saying that Kratom is an emerging public health, is emerging public health crisis. In fact, we have two emergencies in relation to natural health and so forth. We have Kratom, and then of course the war on supplements. We'll try to get through this in the next 8 or so minutes that we have left in the show. We have demonstrating how much science in modern America really isn't scientific at all. The CDC has released a report that claiming that it's an emerging public health threat. Kratom is an emerging public health threat. Those were the phrases that I was looking for. They released that on July 29th. It cites the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and it has a hodgepodge of stories that alleges side effects from Kratom in order to make this declaration. It also cites one of the biggest blights of American society, and notoriously corrupt, panic-driven organizations, one of the biggest shames upon this country. The Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, shouldn't exist. Hey, libertarians, Republicans, you want to cut government? Let's cut that one. Let's just eliminate it, period. Get them out of there. We don't need the DEA. It's pointless. We could get the BATFE out of there, too. If you want to cut government, we can. There's plenty of areas that we can cut. The CDC, of course, is citing a number of alleged Kratom-related deaths in the U.S., and they're also citing the typical DEA hysteria to show that Kratom is becoming a potentially dangerous health issue, and then justifying a flurry of laws dedicated to banning it in various states. Of course, if you've ever seen people from the DEA, you can look at them and tell that these people are the ones that would benefit the most from marijuana or Kratom or something. They're typical to be very red in the face, lots of high blood pressure, deep-seated anger issues there, probably some masculinity issues as well. So these people need much help. Often a lot of them simply believe their own bullshit, though. They actually think that marijuana is actually a narcotic and that it's driving people to commit axe murders and stuff, when it's actually the DEA which is causing the social disruption. Now, despite all of this, we have the NIDA claiming that Kratom can cause psychosis, seizures, and death. The death that's associated with Kratom is murky, to say the least. Most of those reports are based on calls to poison control centers, which don't indicate side effects, don't indicate dangers or safety, or anything other than the fact that individuals consumed the substance and became concerned enough to call the poison control hotline. Poison control centers are contacted a lot of times by people who consume marijuana, right? And nobody's ever died from marijuana. We have this video that went viral on the internet where a cop had confiscated marijuana from a suspect and then consumed it at home with his wife. And he started panicking, and he called 911 for medical assistance because he thought that he and his wife were actually dead. Does that mean that marijuana now officially causes death? Does a phone call make a substance dangerous, or is it the nature of the substance itself? As for the death that's attributed to Kratom, the guy who died was also exposed to anticonvulsive and antidepressive medications, which means that the death could have been caused by either the pharmaceuticals or a combination. Is the CDC now going to label Prozac as an emerging public health threat? With all the violence and suicide connected to SSRIs, the answer really should be yes, if the CDC is going to follow its own logic and principles. If we're not, of course, we're not going to hold our breath when it comes to pharmaceuticals. Virtually no amount of danger or death is going to cause the CDC or the NIDA or the DEA to question them because they were provided with the permission of a doctor, right? So in addition to the obvious totalitarian nature of these various organizations are now attempting to prevent any access to natural substances that might help with medical conditions, to act as daddy to 300 million Americans regarding what they can put in their own bodies, The CDC's own statement is completely based in ignorance, at best. And despite the crackdown on Kratom, there's actually very little study of it. Natural health advocates promote the benefits. The government agencies panic over the next crack epidemic. The fact is there's very little research-based evidence to say whether or not Kratom is safe, whether it's effective, whether it's dangerous, or whether it's just a placebo. Dr. Ed Boyer, who is a professor of emergency medicine at the University of Massachusetts Medical School and a scientist who actually has studied Kratom, in an interview with CNN, he says, quote, "So are they banning a substance that has potential clinical utility? Possibly. Are they banning a substance that has profound risk to people? Possibly. I think what I would prefer is to see somebody not ban it, but at least do some research to see how bad the risk is or how good the benefit is." End quote. It's reasonable, but, well, not the banning. We wouldn't support that anyway, but despite having virtually no evidence for this claim, the CDC is launching a panic and ban it campaign against Kratom. And we hope the CDC treats those highly contagious viruses with better researching skills than it does Kratom, but launching a full-scale war on an herb is not a surprising track for the CDC to take, considering the organization has become more of a political agency and a wing of Big Pharma than anything it was originally intended to be. The fact that the CDC has been exposed covering up dangers of vaccination as well as launching deceptive media campaigns for the stated purpose of instilling fear and anxiety to push vaccines. That's reason enough for the American people to have lost all faith in the CDC and to look at this evidence as biased at best and at worst entirely agenda-driven propaganda. So there is that. Now, only got a couple minutes left. I wish I could go into this in detail, but we have an action alert. All right, we need everybody to take part in this. The Alliance for Natural Health USA just broke out this highest level action alert. This may be the worst attack on natural health supplements since the early 1990s. More information needs to become available, but this is not looking good. The FDA is now trying to revise what it's considering a new health product, a new dietary ingredient. And this is going to potentially remove many supplements off the market. In fact, halt the creation of new supplements. Now, what they want you to do, go read the article. It's posted. It was written by Heather Callahan at naturalblaze.com. Alert: FDA attempting to halt creation of new supplements. It's also up at brandonturbeville.com. Read the article and follow the instructions. Instructions are to write to Congress, your congressmen, your senators, and the FDA to protest these revised guidelines. This is step one in the fight. I don't want to hear any whining and bitching about how, oh, you contact congressmen and senators, but they don't do anything anyway. Well, you might want to actually do the least amount that you can possibly do now in order to get this this first your first punch in, right? Or to get our first strike. This is what you can do. It's literally the least you can do at this point. If we need to go further with the fight, we will. And this is how strategy works. So contact your congressmen and your senators and protest these revised guidelines. There is a sample in this article of an email that you can write. And we encourage you to personalize it, right? Don't just copy it and paste it, but personalize it. It doesn't have to be that long. Just be a few sentences if you like, but do send that out. And hopefully next week we'll have more information on this issue, and we will move to phase 2 if need be. So continue to...
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.